Okay, so fear, right? It's something we all know, isn't it? Like that feeling in your gut that says, uh-oh, this is a little bit risky. But it's wild how different we all react.
Oh, absolutely. Some people, they live for that adrenaline rush, the kind that makes your heart race. But then there are those of us who, well, maybe prefer things a little calmer.
Yeah, I think I fall into that second camp most days.
Huh.
But that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. We're looking at what happens when people push past those boundaries, those comfort zones. When the stakes are high and those challenges, they tap into our deepest fears. And for this one, we're using a recent MrBeast YouTube challenge as like a case study.
And it's a good one, right? Because he
Yeah.
really takes it to the extreme.
Yeah, for those not familiar, MrBeast, he's known for those crazy videos. Always something wild going on. Big challenges, huge prizes.
Oh, yeah. And this one is no exception. We're talking an $800,000 prize pot.
No small change. And the contestant, this is what I find fascinating, it's a returning player, Mac.
You might remember him. He was in a previous challenge, came close to winning it all, but.
Missed out on the big bucks.
Exactly. So there's definitely a redemption arc thing happening here, which I love. But to get there, he's got some serious obstacles to overcome.
And when we say obstacles, we're talking a full-on fear gauntlet, the kind specifically designed to push him to the edge. I mean, we're talking thousands of spiders,
Thousands.
a 200-foot free fall, being stuck in a sinking car.
Yeah, you name it. Mr. Beast probably threw it in there.
It's wild. But here's the thing. Beyond all the, shock value, the entertainment, it actually gives us this unique chance to, like, observe fear in action.
It's like a crash course in human psychology, really.
Right. So how do our bodies react in those moments, physically and mentally?
Mm.
How much of our reactions from, like, past experiences, that desire for control?
Mm.
And maybe most importantly, what can we, regular people learn from all of this? Even if our biggest fear isn't like a swimming pool full of snakes.
Well, that's where I come in, right? To help break it all down.
Exactly. So let's dive right into the thick of it. The very first challenge MrBeast throws at Mac, it's enough to make anyone squirm a bit, even just watching it. 1,000 spiders.
Can you imagine?
1,000. They put him in this like small enclosed space, and then boom, spiders everywhere. And you see it instantly, just the pure panic rising in him.
Oh, yeah, that's that primal instinct kicking in. It's like, even though logically he knows he's not in any real danger.
Right. It's not like they're venomous or anything.
Exactly. But his body, his mind, it's still reacting as if he is. Because fear, it's not always rational. It's often driven by those deep-seated instincts and experiences we might not even realize are influencing us.
And speaking of past experiences, I think MrBeast is tapping into that on purpose with the next challenge, a 200-foot free fall.
Yeah.
But it's not just the height, right? It's how he adds those layers of surprise and lack of control.
Oh, it's masterful, really.
Right. So he leads Mac to believe there's going to be a safety harness, something to catch him. But just as Mac is about to jump, that reassurance, it's gone. Poof. So now he's on this tiny platform 200 feet up, and all that's between him and the ground is this thin wire.
Talk about a recipe for a panic attack.
Seriously. But what I find so fascinating is how he pushes through that initial surge of fear, takes some deep breaths, gathers his courage, and jumps.
That moment of decision, that's what gets me every time.
Wow.
That willingness to act, even when your body is screaming at you to run the other way, that's where we see the incredible strength of the human spirit.
It's like this inner strength that kicks in when we need it most.
Exactly. And that's a theme we'll see throughout this whole challenge, even as the obstacles get tougher and tougher.
Oh, it definitely doesn't get any easier for him. From spiders and heights, we move on to another classic, the fear of drowning. So MrBeast, he straps Mac into a car, no gas pedal, nothing he can do, and they dunk the whole thing in a lake.
I mean, that's terrifying on multiple levels, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the goal is to grab as much cash as possible before the car sinks to the bottom. 45 feet, they said.
Yeah, that's a long way down.
So it's not just about, like, being afraid of water, right? It's that feeling of being trapped, the air running out. How do you even keep your cool when your body's basically going haywire?
Your heart's pounding, you can't think straight, but the clock's ticking. And as if that wasn't enough, Mr. Beast, he throws in another curveball.
Oh, this is the part where he offers the money to quit.
Yep, $100,000 cash right there, just to walk away.
Would you do it?
Yeah.
Seriously, I gotta know because I'd be so tempted.
It's a tough one. 100 grand is nothing to sneeze at, especially when you're practically drowning. But this is where it gets really interesting, psychologically speaking. Because you have to remember, Mac, he's carrying that baggage from the last challenge.
He lost out, right? Walked away with nothing.
Exactly. So even though he's terrified, there's this equally strong desire to prove himself, to conquer this thing that tripped him up before. And in that moment, that's what wins out. He refuses the money, pushes himself to the absolute limit, even though, spoiler alert, he doesn't get all the cash in the end.
Still, talk about intense. But I guess that's the thing about fear, right? It really rears its head when the stakes are high, when we're risking something that matters to us deeply.
Absolutely. And sometimes that risk, it's not even about money or physical safety, It's about our egos, our pride. Think about public speaking. It's not the actual talking that's scary for most people.
The judgment, right.
Exactly. The potential for humiliation, for not being good enough. It's like that middle school feeling of giving a presentation and just wanting to disappear.
Oh, I know that feeling all too well.
Right. We might not be facing a lake full of cash, but emotionally it can feel just as intense.
No kidding. So we've got spiders, heights, drowning.
Yeah.
What other fun things does Mr. Beast have in store?
Well, next up, he switches gears a bit, throws in this mysterious box, like something out of a horror movie.
Okay, now I'm intrigued.
There's ominous music, the lighting's all dramatic, they're really building up the suspense. And
Don't leave me hanging. What's in the box?
Feastables.
Feastables, you mean? The candy bars.
Yep. Mr. Beast's own brand of candy bars. It's a classic bit of comedic relief, and it reminds us that not all fear is created equal, right? Sometimes what we think is a threat, it's just a box of sweets. Or, a harmless spider.
Okay, I get it. But Mr. Beast wouldn't be Mr. Beast without one final, truly epic challenge.
Oh, you're right. And this one, I think it taps into one of the most primal, relatable fears out there. Being trapped, the fear of the unknown.
You're talking about the buried alive challenge.
The one and only. They give Mac 24 hours, that's it, to stay buried underground. He's got a coffin, a walkie-talkie to communicate, and that's pretty much it.
Oh, man. That's where the psychological aspect of fear, it really takes over, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's the isolation, the darkness. It's being alone with your thoughts, all those what-if scenarios running wild in your mind. And of course, Mr. Beast knows exactly how to play that up.
Oh, I bet he does.
Uses the walkie-talkie to mess with them, just to heighten that sense of unease.
Genius, but also kind of mean.
Right. But it works. And for Mac, this challenge, it's extra loaded. Because now he's not just facing the fear itself, but how fear can mess with your thinking. He starts losing track of time, his thoughts get all jumbled.
Oh, no.
In the end, he actually rings the bell early, convinced he's been down there way longer than he has.
Which just shows how powerful fear is, right? It can make you believe things that aren't true.
Exactly. Our brains, they're wired for survival. And when fear takes over, it's like logic and reason, they go out the window.
Right.
We react based on what we feel, not always what's real.
So how do we fight that? How do we recognize when fear is messing with us and make smarter choices, even when we feel like panicking?
That is the million-dollar question. And it's something we'll dig into more as we go deeper on this topic. Because step one is understanding how fear works. Then we can find ways to manage it better.
Right. Knowledge is power. Okay, so far we've got spiders, heights, drowning, being buried alive.
Yep.
That's a lot to handle. But I'm guessing Mr. Beast saves the best for last.
He does. The final challenge is a real doozy, and not just because of what he has to do, but because it brings back all those memories of his previous failure.
You're talking about the cookie challenge, the one where you had to recreate those crazy detailed pictures with the cookie dough.
The very same. And it's not just the challenge itself, it's that fear of failing again, letting those old doubts creep in and mess it all up.
So much pressure.
Right. The competition, the time limit, the task itself is hard enough. And then on top of all that, it's like he's fighting his own mind.
It's like trying to outrun your past, but it's always right behind you.
And that's something I think we can all relate to, right? We all have those moments where we face a challenge that brings up old fears, old insecurities. So the question is, how do we face those moments? How do we show up as our best selves, even when those doubts are whispering in our ear?
The million-dollar question, part 2. And luckily, we've got an expert to guide us. But before we jump into the practical stuff, the takeaways, let's just take a second to think about what we've learned from Mack so far. We've seen how fear can be both primal, in our DNA, and also come from our personal experiences. It can warp how we see things, make us act irrationally. But we've also seen how strong the human spirit can be,
That resilience, that ability to push through fear and achieve incredible things.
even when it feels impossible. So as we move into the next part of our conversation, I want you to think about this. What's one fear you've been grappling with, big or small? What would it take for you to channel your inner Mac and face it head on? Because here's the thing, courage isn't the absence of fear.
It's the willingness to act in spite of it.
And sometimes the greatest things in life, they lie just beyond those comfort zones. We'll be back in a moment to explore how we can use these insights from Mr. Beast's wild challenges to navigate our own lives. Even if our challenges don't involve, quite so many spiders or free falls. All right, so we've been through the ringer a bit with Mac and his Mr. Beast adventures. Spiders, heights, even getting buried alive. It's a lot. But the good news is most of us aren't going to face those exact fears in our daily lives, right?
Thankfully not. But even those extreme examples, they teach us a lot about how fear works in general.
Totally. So how do we take those lessons, those insights, and apply them to our own, maybe less dramatic, but still very real fears, like speaking up at work or finally going after that dream job, even just having a tough conversation with someone we care about?
Well, it all starts with this idea. Fear, it's a messenger. It's trying to tell us something.
Even if that message isn't always super clear, right?
Exactly. It might come out jumbled, disguised as panic or avoidance. But instead of just trying to shut that message down, what if we got curious about it? Oh, I like that. So, like, instead of thinking, oh no, I'm freaking out, it's more like, okay, fear, what are you trying to tell me here?
Exactly. Imagine you've got that big presentation coming up at work and the fear starts creeping in. Pause for a second, ask yourself, what's this fear really about?
So, what kind of answers might come up? I'm really curious.
It could be about being prepared. Like, have you practiced enough? Do you feel confident in your material? Or maybe it's highlighting how much you want to connect with the audience to really get your message across.
So, it's not about trying to become completely fearless, which honestly sounds kind of impossible.
Right. We're human after all. It's more about taking that fear and turning it into something useful. Motivation, even.
Yeah, like a fuel, not a roadblock.
Exactly. Shifting that mindset from, I'm afraid, to, I'm noticing my fear and I'm choosing to move forward anyway. That's where true courage comes in.
That is a powerful reframe. Not the absence of fear, but the action you take despite it. Think back to Mack on that platform. 200 feet up. He was terrified, I guarantee it. But he chased a jump. That's courage. Not because he wasn't scared, but because he acted even though he was.
Okay, so how do we, regular folks who aren't jumping off buildings for YouTube views, how do we cultivate that kind of courage in our own lives?
Well, it's not about suddenly becoming a daredevil. It's about starting small. And it starts with simply acknowledging the fear. Don't judge it. Don't try to bury it. Just say, hey, I see you.
Give it a nod, like, all right, fear, you're here, now what?
Exactly. And one powerful tool is something called gradual exposure. We talked earlier about breaking those big, overwhelming fears into smaller, bite-sized pieces.
Right. Instead of trying to give a TED Talk on day one, maybe you practice with a friend, then a small group, build up to it.
Perfect example. Gradually exposing yourself to the thing you're afraid of, it helps you build up that tolerance. And often you realize the reality is way less scary than the stories your mind was cooking up.
And each time you take that step, even if it feels small, it's a win, right? Builds that confidence.
Huge win. Celebrate those victories. Recognize the courage it took to show up, even when it was tough. And remember, you don't have to do this alone. Talk to someone you trust, a friend, family member, therapist. Having that support system, it makes a world of difference.
Just having someone to listen, to say, I get it, it's tough, that could be huge.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of taking care of yourself in general. Good sleep, exercise, even just taking a few minutes to breathe deeply, all of that helps calm your system down, makes it easier to handle the fear when it shows up.
So it's like a multi-pronged approach. Understanding your fear, taking small steps, building that support network, and taking care of yourself along the way.
And through it all, remember Mac, he stumbled, he didn't always succeed, but he kept going. And that's the real measure of courage, isn't it? Not avoiding the stumbles, but getting back up and trying again.
Such a powerful message. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you all with this question. What's one small step you can take this week to confront a fear that's been holding you back? Maybe it's speaking up in a meeting, trying that new hobby, having that conversation you've been putting off. Whatever it is, remember, courage is a muscle. It gets stronger the more you use it. Who knows? You might just surprise yourself with what you're capable of. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep diving deep.